Well, I think the context is very important here, and if we really take a very close look at the chronology of events that have led to this latest Israeli offensive against Gaza, we would find that actually Hamas has not chosen the option of a militant or violent confrontation with Israel. That in fact, if we go back to this past spring when we heard all of those reports about a unity government, that at a time when Hamas's political standing was quite weak in the Gaza Strip, that in fact they actually came to an agreement with the Fatah leadership in order to actually ease the situation tremendously and to actually be able to try to transition towards something of a unity position among all of the different Palestinian factions. And it was Israel and to a certain extent even the United States that actually undermined that unity government. And it was only after Israel broke the ceasefire, and of course we know all about the reports of the different killings and bombings, that Hamas then chose the second option, or was confronted essentially with an attempt by Israel to destroy it in Gaza, to destroy its presence there.
So it's tough to, as I have said here before, to go through the the entire conflict right between these two groups. There's just not enough time. We'd be on television for hours. But my question
but we're only talking about this past few months. We're not talking about years.
I agree with that, but most people are asking, can there be peace? Can the two sides coexist when Hamas's initial mission, that is part of its mission statement, is to destroy Israel? How can you coexist with someone who wants to destroy Israel?
If we look at their most recent statements, and we don't have to go far back into history. We can go back to this afternoon when one of the leaders, Khalid Mashal, who's based in Qatar, said very openly that they're very much in favor of having a truce that could last up to 10 years, and in fact that they've been trying to maintain this truce. I mean, again, when we think about the military imbalance, Hamas is not in any condition or situation whatsoever to actually be able to carry out these threats against Israel's existence. But in fact, the opposite is quite true, and I think the real emphasis here has to be on the humanitarian crisis against the people of Gaza.
Okay, I don't want to spend the entire time we have together debating this. All right, let's move on now, because I want to talk about what's actually going on there. You know, that FAA ban on flights into Israel. I'm wondering if that is viewed as a victory for Hamas.
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily a victory for Hamas, but certainly I think given the kinds of the imbalance in the humanitarian situation, given what's going on in Gaza and the kinds of massacres and the things that have happened there, that certainly this is a very interesting kind of contradiction, given the fact that Israel has justified the atrocities against the Palestinians on the basis of the fact that these rocket attacks seem to pose such a massive threat, and yet at the same time the Israeli leaders today are saying, well, actually the rocket threats don't seem to be that bad, and as a result we should be able to allow these flights in and out of the country. And so it seems to be a massive contradiction in terms, because it's that supposed threat that Israel has used as the pretext upon which to act against the entire civilian population of Gaza.
And Professor, I have to move on. Thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us this evening on CNN. Please come back, okay? Thank you. I want to get a different perspective now on Hamas. I'm joined now by Musab Hassan Youssef. He's the author of Son of Hamas, and he joins us live. You know, your father was a founding member of Hamas, and you were groomed to take a leadership position. Eventually, you converted to Christianity, rejected their political and military objectives. Why did you do that?
Well, for the simple reasons that we see right now in Gaza, that Hamas does not care about the lives of Palestinians, does not care about the lives of Israelis or Americans. They don't care about their own lives. They consider dying for the sake of their ideology a way of worship. And how can you continue in that society?
Okay. I'll ask you the same question I asked my last guest. Can you coexist with someone whose mission is your destruction?
Well, Hamas is not seeking coexistence and compromise. Hamas is seeking conquest and taking over. And by the way, Israel, the destruction of the state of Israel is not Hamas' final destination. Hamas' final destination is building the Islamic Khilafah, which means an Islamic state on the rubble of every other civilization. These are the ultimate goals of the movement.
Musab, you say in your book that Hamas targets civilians as a tool of war. Tell us about the Hamas that you know from growing up in the West Bank.
Well, in the mosques, Hamas taught us that without shedding innocent blood for the sake of the ideology, we won't be able to build an Islamic state. They were preparing us from the age as young as 5 years old. This is the ideology that Hamas was feeding us. And honestly, it's impossible almost for anybody to break through and see the truth of and real face of Hamas and be able to leave at some point. As you see in my case, I had to lose everything just to say no to Hamas. And today when I look at the children of Gaza and I know what they are fed, I know that they have no choice.
Yeah. Musab, thank you. Appreciate you joining us. Next time we'll spend a little